I think we're okay.
All right. Sorry about that. So yeah, thanks so much for everybody for joining. Yeah, so I did receive Slovak citizenship through descent, and it's been quite a journey, quite a long journey, and a lot of uncertainties. And I think there's more and more information coming out. So I think the people that are going through this now have more resources than I did at the beginning. But I'll just walk you through kind of my journey, which may be a little bit atypical, but um, uh, and then at the end of the presentation, happy to take any questions, and we can go from there. And always happy. You see my email here, bdemko@crs.org. Also happy to connect, one-on-one if anybody has any further questions or would like to continue the conversation. So anyway, I'll just get started. So a little bit about my background. I think this is pretty important, to the journey that I took to get citizenship. So I grew up in a small town, I'd say mid-sized town outside of Cleveland called Lorain, Ohio. And I think my situation was a little bit unique because what happened was my father, my father's side of the family is Rusyn, but my grandmother, his mother and father, my grandmother and grandfather divorced when my dad was, I think, 4 or 5 years old, and I don't think it was a very amicable divorce because my grandmother really was not she didn't talk much about her former husband. I think when my dad was growing up there wasn't a lot of interaction there. So there information on this on the Slovak side, which was my father's father was Slovak and Rusyn. Information on that side of my family was very sparse, so I didn't know much about it. I knew they had come from Slovakia. I didn't even know they were Rusyn until probably 5 years ago after I started doing more research. But my grandmother's side was from Romania, although ethnically they were Hungarian. So I really grew up knowing a lot about my Romanian heritage and the Hungarian. They really identified as Romanian, even though ethnically they were Hungarian. I not sure how that worked out, but I think in the old country there was some, bad blood towards the Hungarians or something. So I grew up very, knowledgeable about the Romanian side. My family would, there was a local Romanian club with a bar and restaurant. We were members. I think my great grandfather had some hand in founding that in that organization. So, went to the Orthodox Church with the Romanians and, knew that side of my family well. Did not know the Slovak side well at all, unfortunately. So that's just a little background on this journey. So, I will say before I start getting into some of the nitty gritty, I'm not an attorney, so this is not legal advice. I'm just sharing my personal experience. But obviously, if this is a path you want to go down and spend substantial resources and time, I would obviously recommend you speak with a lawyer, particularly in Slovakia. My journey, I started, I think, probably maybe around 2010, 2000. Yeah, I guess it must have been around 2010. I was single at the time and always wanted to travel Europe and never really got to. And around 2010, I was fairly stable in my career and had some good vacation time and such. So every summer, I began traveling throughout Europe and did a lot of it on my own. A little bit with friends, but I had no problem traveling alone. So I just kind of went off on my own and did some things. And I loved it. Everywhere I went, I loved. I don't think there's a country I visited in Europe that I didn't enjoy. Being single and having finished school and having some freedom, I thought to myself, man, I would really love to live in Europe. So I started researching on, ways to do that. And I quickly learned that it's not that easy, because if you're not an EU citizen, it's hard to get employment permits, and then you've got visas that you can only stay a certain amount of time, and these types of things. Um, so anyway, I started researching ways to become a citizen, and in 2010, I think it was 2010, the Hungarian government opened up citizenship to ancestors of people that lived in the former Kingdom of Hungary. So I highlighted here, it says a descendant of a person who was a Hungarian citizen before 1920 is eligible. Only the Kingdom of Hungary, part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, or between 1941 and 1945. So all that to say, it's very broad. And if you're interested in getting European citizenship, but maybe you're not eligible for Slovak citizenship, you may be eligible for Hungarian citizenship under this. So in any case, I figured, I learned that I was eligible because if you see here, this slide shows the former Kingdom of Hungary in green. So it encapsulated, much of Romania, all of Slovakia, substantial portions of Croatia, Serbia. And my Romanian side of my family came from Bihor County, which is in this red circle here. So I absolutely knew, like, okay, I'm eligible for Hungarian citizenship, but the big obstacle is right here in blue. You have to speak Hungarian. So that was an obstacle. My family never taught me Hungarian. Unfortunately, it never taught me Romanian either. I think when they came to this country, they pretty much said, we're going to make a go of it in the U.S. Let's make sure our kids are speaking English, our grandkids, etc. They continued close ties with through church and through the Romanian club and things like that. But that was about it. So unfortunately, I didn't speak Romanian or Hungarian, but I wasn't going to let that stop me because I really wanted European citizenship. So I started out on a journey to learn Hungarian. And if anybody's ever tried to speak Hungarian, I got to tell you, it was damn near impossible for me. I actually went to Hungary in the hopes of, learning Hungarian, at least enough to get by. And so I applied to a program through the Hungarian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which was a summer program. It was about a month and a half, and it was a language and culture program. And their target audience is ethnic Hungarians that live outside of Hungary. I got accepted, and went there to learn Hungarian, and spent about a month there, and did not learn Hungarian. I learned some words. It's very hard. Some people on this call may speak Hungarian, or may have tried to learn Hungarian, could probably attest to how different it is from English. But so anyway, so I did that for a few years. I was like, I'm going to really try to learn Hungarian. So I did it. I went to Hungary, and then I came back to the U.S. and continued my studies online with a Hungarian tutor, etc. And I included this here. This is actually a picture of my great grandfather. His name was Peter Piros. If you know Hungarian, Piros means red. It's the color red. So he's the guy on the right, Peter Piros. He's in his Austro-Hungarian uniform there before he came to this country. So anyway, knew about him very well and did a lot of research. He actually has an extremely colorful history once he came to this country. And I put a little note there about, I found a newspaper article about him, and I get the feeling he wasn't one of the most savory of characters. I think he did a lot of bootlegging back during Prohibition. I know, growing up right on the shores of Lake Erie there was a lot of people that would run moonshine and such, across Lake Erie into Lorain and Cleveland and these types of areas. And I think he was pretty involved in that. And this article here kind of shows like some of the gangster activities that he was involved in. But he very colorful character. Never got to meet him. He died well before I was born. But anyway, I thought this was my ticket to this guy was my ticket to European citizenship. But alas, it was not to be because, like I said, Hungarian is extremely, at least for me, it was extremely hard to learn. So I put this up here. This is kind of a map of languages, and if you didn't know, Hungarian is really a totally different branch of language from most modern European languages. So you can see English there is highlighted in red. So it's kind of off the branch of a West Germanic type language. If you want to, Rusyn would be, if you look over here a little bit towards the middle of the tree, you see the Slavic line where you see Russian, Ukrainian, Slovak, Polish. I don't think Rusyn's on here, but that's where Rusyn would be. And then you see Hungarian, totally different language. It comes from the Uralic. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but totally different branch of languages that actually came from, I believe, the more of the steppes of Central Asia. So nothing like English, needless to say, extremely hard to learn. And as I was struggling through this, language and kind of coming to the conclusion that I'm probably never going to be fluent in this language, and started kind of giving up on my dreams of European citizenship. At that time, Slovakia all of a sudden opened up citizenship. So in 2022, a person was able to apply for Slovak citizenship by descent. And to qualify, you need a parent, a grandparent, or a great grandparent who was either born or became a citizen of Czechoslovakia. So that period is the relevant period is from 1918, when Czechoslovakia was formed, to 1989, when the Czech Republic and Slovakia kind of branched off and went their own ways. Now, this is a little bit misleading because that 1918 number is when Czechoslovakia was formed, but people were retroactively considered citizens of Czechoslovakia back until, I think, back to 1910. So it gets pretty complicated with these dates, which is why I, definitely had that disclaimer at the beginning that I'm not a lawyer, and this could get pretty complicated. But I think most importantly for this was that no language required. The Slovaks don't require a language requirement. And I started looking into it, and I thought, it's pretty interesting. Some of the reasons like Slovakia decided to open up citizenship. So Hungary had opened up citizenship back to 2010 for people of Hungarian descent. And I think that caused, if you know about the history of the area, I think there's always been some, back and forth between Slovaks, Hungarians, Czech Republics, areas that used to be part of that kingdom of Hungary. From my understanding, Hungary is, when they had lost a lot of territory through the Treaty of Trianon after World War I, there's still a lot of bad feelings about that, and they feel like they left or they were a lot of their land was stolen from them. A lot of ethnic Hungarians who lived in those lands were no longer Hungarian. So needless to say, Hungary opened up citizenship for ethnic Hungarians that live outside of Hungary, which is and they still allow that. But what happened was, I think Slovakia found that many of their citizens were applying for Hungarian citizenship, as well as people from other areas, Croatia and things like that. And if you know about European demographics, there's the demographics aren't great in Europe, and Slovakia is no exception. So they're starting to see a decline in population, working age population, et cetera. And Slovakia saw a lot of their citizens applying for Hungarian citizenship for whatever reason. So I think they were quite worried about losing more population to Hungary, et cetera. So my guess is they decided to say, hey, let's have a similar kind of scheme where our descendants can apply for Slovak citizenship. And really, it's kind of I think it's a great idea. I think it's a good way for the country to maintain ties with the diaspora community outside of Slovakia. It's also kind of like a soft immigration policy that brings in culturally connected individuals back to Slovakia that may be a generation or two removed from actually living there. And there, like I said, there's also a geopolitical component. When Hungary started offering citizenship, Slovakia at first they didn't like this, like I said, because some Slovaks were applying for Hungarian citizenship, so Slovakia actually canceled dual citizenship for a time to kind of put a stop to that. And then I think maybe they came to the conclusion that if you can't beat them, join them. So they ended up reversing that and opening up citizenship to ethnic Slovaks. And this helped Slovakia maintain ties with their diaspora. It helped them avoid losing ethnic Slovaks to Hungarian citizenship policies, et cetera. And I think more than anything, it really, at least in my case, kind of helps the diaspora strengthen international cultural and economic networks to Slovakia. So they ended up opening up citizenship, which was great news to me when I heard about it in 2022. But even more great news to me was there was no language requirement. So I was on it, really quickly. My problem, like I said, was I didn't know that much about my Slovak side. So I started digging into ancestry.com, and again, I really didn't find a lot of information about my family, but I did find this. This is a draft card from World War One, probably shortly after my Andrew Demko. That's my great grandfather who came here from Slovakia. This is a draft card from World War One. I think probably soon after he arrived, and so I did find this clue. Where were you born? Mihalány, Austria, Hungary. That's really the only clue I had to go on. I didn't know any village names. I didn't know, that side of my family I had lost touch with due to the divorce when my father was a kid. So really didn't know anything except this. So what I did was I contacted, what I did was I actually went to, I contacted a genealogist in Slovakia and told him, and I said, I've got this document here that says Mihalány, Austria-Hungary. And he said, to be honest with you, there's probably about 5 or 6 Mihalánys, towns named Mihalány in Slovakia. Which one can I help you, locating documents in? And I said, man, I really don't know. So I kept digging and digging and digging. And I came across another resource in ancestry.com. And it was the civil birth certificates, or I'm sorry, the Slovak church records. So birth, marriage, and death. It's on ancestry.com right now. It's actually in English, I believe, if I remember correctly, but it's one of the largest Slovakia data sets on Ancestry. And I just started kind of combing through that. And just by pure luck, I came across an Andrew Demko in the baptism records that matched the date of birth that I saw here on this draft card. So, what are the chances of an Andrew Demko being born on the same day, et cetera? It must be him, right? So immediately I contacted genealogist again, and I said, hey, I found this record in the Slovak church records, and it says that he was baptized in Šarišské Michaľany. And if I'm butchering that pronunciation, forgive me. I'm not my pronunciation, my Slovak pronunciation isn't very good. But anyway, so this is the village in Slovakia where my ancestral village, eastern Slovakia near Prešov, and I think it's in between Prešov and Kosice or Košice, however you pronounce it. But here's a picture of it. I kind of went to Google Maps and started. You could go through street by street and see all the different things in the town. It was really cool. So anyway, I asked the genealogist, hey, can you try to see if you could get my great grandfather's birth certificate? I honestly thought this was going to be the hardest part of the whole journey, was to find my great grandfather's birth certificate in Slovakia. Ended up being one of the easiest parts of the journey. So the genealogist went to the town, and I'm sure they've got like a local, civil service kind of office that he went to, asked for it. They looked it up, bam, got it, no problem. And at the same time, I was doing some genealogical research and came up with this, family tree. So, through those church records, I was able to, ascertain that Andrew Demko, my great grandfather, was born in Šarišské Michaľany on November 8th, 1992. I could ascertain that his father was Stefan Demko from the same town, and his mother was Zuzana Vanyo from the same town. So I gave this all this information to the genealogist. He was actually able to do his research, which I don't think was a lot, but was able to send me this, which is the Rodny list, which translates to birth certificate for my great grandfather. So this kind of really gave me that anchor document that I needed to show my connection to Slovakia. And he was born in 1892. So I was a little bit nervous. So I kind of didn't understand, the cutoff, when so like I said before, Czechoslovakia became a nation in 1918, I believe. But for certain folks that were born, like my great grandfather in 1892, they became like retroactively citizens in 1910. So I know he was born in 1892. My big question was, did he leave Slovakia before 1910? Because if he did, there was a chance that he might not have become a Czechoslovak citizen. So, I was quite worried about that. So I continued doing my research. He left Slovakia and came to a town in Pennsylvania called Sagamore, Pennsylvania. These are some old pictures of Sagamore. It was a coal mining town, and it was actually a company town where they had the company store, company housing, all that. So he came to Sagamore and worked in the mines. And I think he left Slovakia when he was about 18. Came to Sagamore, worked in the mines, as did many Slovaks and other Eastern Europeans at the time. I did some research on the time. It has a really colorful history. If you ever some of your families maybe had similar journeys, as when they came to the U.S., working in the coal mines and such. But I think a lot of these coal towns were very similar, and Sagamore really had a colorful history. You could see I highlighted some things here that I thought were really interesting. So, they talked about how people from various parts of Europe came and they stayed together through the journey. They helped each other, especially when someone in the family was sick or the breadwinner was injured. They had, if you can see here, they had a pretty nice hotel, from what I can tell, this big white building here in Sagamore. And that was kind of, I think, where, there's the big gathering spot for all the folks and all that. But the guy that ran the inn or the hotel, he talked about in this history about how after he moved to Sagamore, there was times where they would have actual hand-to-hand combat that would erupt between ethnic rival groups. And He said it looked like a small war. Both sides were equipped with pitchforks and axe handles. Happily, the hotel personnel sent for the state-mounted cavalry troops who arrived in time to prevent fatalities. So, I picture this kind of rough and tumble mining town with all these different ethnic groups, from Eastern Europe and in other areas that, stuck together, stuck with each other and kind of looked out for each other and that type of thing. But it was also a good time, I think, because, I also found a lot of good stories about, all the different ethnic groups, having baseball teams that they, would compete against and, had a good time. And I think, in the mines, all the people looked out for each other and stuff. So anyway, I don't want to paint a picture that everything was, too rough back then. I'm sure it was rough, but it did have good times as well. But then really rough times hit in mid 1924 when the owner of the mines shut down the mines due to union unrest. So, from my understanding, the owner could not maintain the terms of this Jacksonville agreement as demanded by the United Mine Workers Association. So, obviously the workers, wanted to organize to have better salaries, better wages, better rights, etc. Owners obviously did not want that, so they closed down the mine to try to put a stop to this. But as many of the mines experienced during this time, it was a pretty tough time for the unions and the mine owners. A lot of fighting between them and such. And at least in the story of Sagamore, it sounds like within weeks, many, the union lost out completely, and many of the union men took their families to other cities to find work, and my family was no exception. It got pretty bad, I think. I did find, in District 2, some of the people in Sagamore were the last to surrender their union charter, and they retaliated by dynamiting company housing and singing spirited union songs as they paraded in front of that hotel. But alas, they did not prevail in their union organizing, and ended up getting replaced by what they called scabs. So people that were non-union people and would work for lower pay. So a lot of the Slovaks that were in the unions and other Eastern Europeans ended up saying, the heck with this, ended up leaving. At least in the case of my family, they came to a place called Lorain, Ohio, which is outside of Cleveland. There's a big steel mill there, U.S. Steel, who actually ended up going to Eastern Europe and recruiting for workers. But there were workers, a lot of workers from Eastern Europe, a lot of workers from Puerto Rico, African Americans who came from the South. So it was this big melting. Lorain was this big melting pot of different ethnicities. Even when I grew up there in the 70s and 80s, everybody belonged to a certain ethnic club, or they had their own fish fries, they had their own churches. That's kind of how it was. And you'd meet somebody and you'd say, where are you from? Where's your family from? And you automatically knew, what to say. Slovakia or Poland or wherever. I had a friend that was not from there, and my grandfather, said, "Where are you from?" And he said, "I'm American." No, where's your family from? In Europe. And then he knew what he was talking about, but that was a normal thing back then. And I kind of tongue in cheek, I put on this slide, I put on to greener pastures, Lorain, Ohio, because if you know anything about Lorain, it's anything but green. It's a pretty gritty, steel mill town, and still is. A lot of the jobs from the mill have gone away, but Lorain's still there, and people are still struggling to get by. And it's always been kind of a rough and tumble, or a rough and gritty kind of steel mill town. So anyway, Andrew Demko moved from Sagamore to Lorain, brought my great grandfather with him. His name was Stephen Andrew Demko. Ended up working in the steel mill as well. But he also had, I think, 5 sisters. So my grandfather was the only boy of 6 siblings. So they came to Lorain. And so I was able to no problem find things like, my grandfather, when he married my grandmother, no problem finding marriage certificate, no problem finding my father's birth certificate, things like that. Um, what I had trouble finding and what almost ruined my hopes of getting citizenship was I couldn't find my grandfather's birth certificate because he was born in Sagamore, Pennsylvania, then moved to Lorraine. So his birth certificate would have been in Pennsylvania. Went to the state and said, "Hey, I'm looking for my grandfather's birth certificate." Applied for it. They said, "Okay, come back in 2 weeks. We should have it for you." I went back in 2 weeks. They said we could find nothing. So I said, "Oh no, what am I going to do now? Is that going to ruin like basically all my chances of this?" So I thought, well, I know in Europe, oftentimes church records substitute for government records. So I thought, well, if I could find the church that he was baptized at in Sagamore, I could maybe find his baptism certificate. So I did find on Ancestry again. I found Andrew, my great grandfather, who came from Slovakia. He met a woman in Sagamore, also a Slovak woman. They got married in Sagamore. So in Ancestry, it said the church they got married at was this church here, which is Saint what was it? I think it's Saint Michael, or let me see. Saints Peter and Paul. I'm sorry, Saints Peter and Paul in Byzantine Catholic Church in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. So that's where they were married. That's a picture of it. I went to visit, and that's a picture of the inside of the church. And while I was there, I said, "Hey, I think my great grandparents got married here. Do you have any old records?" And the woman, the secretary of the church, she was probably in her 80s or early 90s, and there was these big, huge books, like hundreds of pages thick, and probably a 1 foot by 2 feet. They were huge books of records, and I helped her pull out the old records. And we did find, I know it's hard to see here, but we did find their marriage record, which in this column here, if you could see, did say Saint Michaľany Šariš. So at that point, I knew this was the right guy. This is my great grandfather, my great grandmother. They did get married in this church, but there was no baptismal record. So what I think happened was, this is the church in Sagamore, which looks like this now, completely abandoned. But at the time was a flourishing, Byzantine church in Sagamore, Pennsylvania, where I'm sure my grandfather was baptized. But like I said, it no longer exists. It was decommissioned. I think the structure is still there, but so I was pretty kind of worried that I wasn't going to be able to find I couldn't find his birth certificate but from the state, and I didn't have his baptismal certificate because this church had been closed down. Just by pure luck, I happened to kind of been Googling this church, and actually found out that all the records from this old Byzantine church were transferred to a church that exists today, which is called St. Mary Mother of God Catholic Church in Yatesboro, Pennsylvania. So called that church, really met a nice woman, the secretary of that church. She looked it up and said, "Oh yeah, we've got these old records," and was able to look up my grandfather, Stephen Demko, child of Andy Demko. Again, Andy's the one that came from Slovakia, and Catherine, his wife, born in Sagamore. So she was able to send me this, which really renewed my hope of getting citizenship. I think what happened, and many of you may have similar stories, was I think this church actually was built in 1892. So this church was in Punxsutawney was around when before my grandfather was born. So I think what happened was they had probably a main priest that would go to these smaller mining towns and baptize the children or hold a service once in a while, and then the records were kept at that mining town church. And then when the mining town churches closed, the records were transferred to existing Catholic churches. So if you're ever unable to find church records due to a closed Byzantine Catholic church in some of the old coalfield areas, don't despair. That the records may have been transferred to other churches in the area, and there is if you contact the Byzantine Catholic Church kind of overall overseeing body, they could probably tell you where those church records might have been transferred to. So anyway, got his birth certificate, was really happy about that. And while I was there, I just happened to go. So this was Armstrong County where this church was. I just happened to go to their their county records office to see what else I could find. And luckily they started going through. They were really nice. They started going through kind of all the old records, and they found this, which is my great grandfather's certificate of arrival. I saw June 1910, which really made me happy, right? Because I was worried that maybe he came before 2009 or 1909, before Czechoslovakia, was a nation, and maybe I wasn't eligible. So I saw that and I was like, okay, so he came in 1910, and he was. If you look to the right, they also were able to look up his oath of allegiance to the U.S., which was he didn't do until 1921. So for some reason, he came here in 1910, did not naturalize as a citizen until 1921. And it must have just been pure luck that I stopped there and they gave me this information, because I think that became a much easier for the Slovak authorities to understand, when he came to the U.S., when he left Slovakia, when he actually became a U.S. citizen, et cetera. It made it a little more straightforward. If I wouldn't have had these documents, I think it probably, they maybe would have asked me some more questions, maybe would have dug a little deeper. But luckily I had those documents. But still, it was very confusing to me, like who's a citizen or who became a citizen. He left in 1910 before Czechoslovakia actually became a nation, but he naturalized as a U.S. citizen after Czechoslovakia had become a nation. So he kind of inherited Czechoslovak citizenship because he had not naturalized yet as a U.S. citizen, which I think helped me a lot. But I will say, if your anchor ancestor came to the U.S. before 1910 or naturalized before Czechoslovakia became a nation, don't give up, because I'm learning more and more that there's people that are in that situation that have been getting citizenship. So I think there's ways around it. What I did, because I really wanted to give myself the best chances, I looked for a lawyer in Slovakia, and I found this Faleth and Partners. If you Google, Slovak citizenship by descent lawyers, they're one of the more prominent ones. They'll definitely come up. Unfortunately, they're probably one of the more expensive ones too. There's plenty of them out there. I can vouch for Faleth. I can't vouch for others. I did have a good experience with Faleth and Partners. But anyway, I ended up having a kind of a consultation with them, and they looked at all my stuff and my dates, and they said, yeah, we think you're probably 85% chance that we could get you citizenship. I said, okay, great. But as you'll notice here on the left, pre-1910 immigration cases, they do handle those as well. So like I said, if your ancestor came here before 1910, don't just give up if this is something you really want to do, because I think there are ways around it. And they might be able to help you with it, or some of the other lawyers that are specialized in this area might be able to help you. So anyway, they kind of laid out for me what the best route was. And they said the first route would be to get your Slovak living abroad certificate. I had no idea what that was. So, what it is, I found out it's so Slovaks living abroad are individuals who direct ancestors were of Slovak ethnicity and retain Slovak national cultural awareness. And most importantly, There is no, most importantly, there is no generational limit. So as far as you could go back in time and say these ancestors minds of mine had were ethnically Slovak, don't have to be Czechoslovak citizens or anything like that. As long as they're ethnically Slovak, you would be eligible for the Slovak Living Abroad certificate, even if you're not eligible for citizenship. So I applied for this certificate, and really the only thing I had to do was I had to fill out an application for the certificate. I had to fill out an application for Slovak residency, which is part of this, and then prove that. Oh, number one, I had to prove that my Slovak ancestor, was Slovak ethnicity, and I also had to prove a I think right here, let's see. Nope, I don't have it on there. But I also had to prove some type of connection to Slovakia, right? So that could be you could write a statement talking about your family in Slovakia and some of the, some of the traditions they kept, and maybe if Slovak, that's definitely an indicator. What I did was, because I didn't have too much of a close ties to my family, there's a Slovak organization called Global Slovakia, and they offer Slovak language classes. They have books on Slovak books on Slovakia, history books, etc. They offer courses on Slovak history, things like that. I had taken some Slovak history courses through them, just for my own kind of interest, and asked them. I said, "Hey, can you write a letter, just kind of vouching that I do have ties to Slovakia?" And they were happy to do it. So I had that letter. I had my application. I had my application for my SLA, my Slovak Living Abroad certificate. I had my application for my residency permit, which, by the way, you don't have to live in Slovakia to get residency. And my lawyer in Slovakia helped me kind of translate documents, and really the only thing I had to send, I'm very surprised about this. The only thing I had to send to prove my Slovak ethnicity was a census. Like it was like a 1930 or 1940 census document that listed first language as Slovak. That's all they needed to grant me the Slovak Living Abroad certificate. So, all that to say, even if you're not eligible for Slovak citizenship, you may be eligible for a Slovak Living Abroad certificate as long as you could provide some link to Slovak ancestry. And there are some quite time-consuming rules that the Slovak government needs. Number one, all the documents you get. So, like that census document I had, they must be apostille and translated into Slovak. So, what does apostille mean? Well, if you've never had an apostille document, it's usually you send it into some government entity that is in charge of those documents. They verify that it's original and all that. It does take time. So I put here the title of this slide, the paperwork marathon. I think this is where most people give up, is they realize, oh, we got to, I have to connect myself to my ancestors and, prove through birth certificates, other records, et cetera, that, I'm eligible. And you have to get all these documents apostilled and certified and translated into Slovak, which is very time consuming. This is the most time consuming part of the whole thing, because a lot of times, especially for federal documents like the census document, you have to send it to the State Department, so the federal government in DC, and of course, as you can imagine, I mean, they're backlogged, blah blah blah. So I waited had to wait a couple of months for that, and they sent it to me. And in the meantime, it ends up becoming kind of a this practice of organizing, because one of the documents you need is an FBI background check, but that background check is only good for 3 months. So you're sending your documents to get apostille, knowing that it could be you could get them back in a month, or you could get them back in 4 months. You don't know. In the meantime, the FBI document is only good for 3 months. So, it's kind of this thing that becomes an annoyance, and I think a lot of people give up. But I kind of waited. I just, I had time, so I waited until I got all my apostille documents back, because the apostille documents don't. There's no time limit on them, so they're good forever. So I waited till I got them back. Then I did my FBI background check, etc. In order to apply for your Slovak living abroad certificate, you have to go to a Slovak consulate or embassy. I think, to my knowledge, there's two of them in the U.S., one in New York City and one in D.C. And depending on where you live in the country, depends on which one is responsible for you. So where I lived in Cleveland, I was assigned to the New York one. If you live probably in the South, maybe certain parts of the West, maybe certain Atlantic states, you may be DC. For Ohio, it's New York. So I actually had to go to the consulate. I had to call them. I had to make an appointment to apply for my Slovak living abroad certificate. They gave me an appointment. They spoke English. They were very nice. They don't expect you to speak Slovak or anything like that. Made an appointment, went to New York, turned in all my documents for this, which again were the Slovak living abroad certificate and the residency permit, which for some reason, when you apply for Slovak citizenship, you have to have residency. It's a formality. Don't let that scare you away. You don't have to actually live there. They kind of just rubber stamp it if you get the Slovak living abroad certificate. So, within, I would say, I think they have 3 months to decide on your Slovak living abroad certificate. I got it. My lawyer contacted me and said, "Hey, you got it." They sent it to me. So what does that mean? So with the Slovak living abroad certificate, you could live in Slovakia. You don't have to have residency, or I'm sorry, you don't have to have citizenship. You can live in Slovakia for as long as you want. You can work there. It does, if you're not eligible for citizenship by descent, the SLA will give you a streamlined path to citizenship. So, you might have to live there for 2 years instead of the normal 5 years that somebody might have to live there. Things like that. You're able to purchase property in Slovakia, open a business, receive healthcare, blah blah blah. So basically, it's like almost like having Slovak citizenship, but not EU citizenship. So you could pretty much do everything you want in Slovakia. You could live there, etc. But it would not be eligible if you wanted to, let's say, move to France and work there. So I had the SLA, which I was real happy about, because I still didn't know if I'd ever get citizenship. But at least I have this SLA. Maybe it's something that I could hang my hat on. And this is what it looks like. So it's a kind of a card that a little bit bigger than a license plate, but they send it to you. And then at the same time, like I said, when I was in New York, I applied for residency. This is a residency document they sent me. Again, this seemed to be very kind of like rubber stamp. If they give you the SLA, it's almost guaranteed they're going to give you the residency document. They just wrote down Stare Mesto, which means old town in Slovakian. So again, pretty lax. I didn't need an address. I didn't need any of that. They kind of just rubber stamped it. So I had 2 steps done. I had the Slovak living abroad certificate. I had the residency permit. The last thing I needed to do was apply for. I had to apply for citizenship. That was the last section. And again, I was working with lawyers in Slovakia, so they kind of helped me put my paperwork together. They helped me translate my documents. They helped me kind of put a whole package together. So when I went back to New York to the consulate to actually apply for citizenship, I was able to easily do so because I had worked with that lawyer, and they kind of put everything in a packet for me. So I went back to New York. Well, I had to make an appointment, which I think they made me wait 3 months or something. So after 3 months, I went back to New York, applied for citizenship, and luckily I had this lady there that was really nice, because some of my documents actually were not in order, and I didn't speak Slovak. I didn't understand what was out of order. So she took some time for me to. She took her time and helped me kind of organize them and make copies and things like that. All that to say that I was intimidated going there because I didn't speak Slovak. I didn't want to be disrespectful and, just start speaking English and have them assume that they, assume that they knew English and all that. But they were really nice. And, they helped me through it, sent everything back to Slovakia. And then at that point, it's in the Slovaks' hands whether or not they grant you citizenship. So, the offices over there, I'm not sure. Probably they have an immigration office, I guess, and immigration police that go through your application, and they formally say they have 12 to 18 months to make a decision. For me, it took about 4. In my case, again, I don't think my case was that straightforward. I think if you had like a grandparent that was born in Slovakia, I think it would be like, so much. I think it'd be, so much more straightforward. Mine was great grandparents, so I think it was a little bit more complicated. But even with that, it only took 4 months. And I've talked to others who have done this, and that seems to be about the norm. So this 12 to 18 months that they advertise seems to be kind of like to cover to cover their behinds. So in case it takes longer, you're not calling them and bugging them. But anyway, mine took about 4 months. And I got an email from the consulate saying, "Hey, congratulations, you were approved for citizenship." At that point, I had to go back to New York. I had to do the oath, so I had to raise my right hand. I had to read the oath, the Slovak oath of citizenship in Slovak. Luckily, I thought I had to memorize it, so I'm sitting there, memorizing this oath in Slovak and, stressing out over, whether I pronounce something wrong in front of these people, etc. But then I get there and it was very informal. Actually, they put the paper down that, had the oath on it. I just had to read it, raise my right hand. I thought maybe it was going to be this kind of formal ceremony where there was other people that were raising their right hand with me and, celebratory kind of thing. And, with all the pomp and circumstance, it actually was the opposite. I was sitting in a chair, with a window between me and, the consulate guy. I raised my right hand. I read the oath, and he very, straight face said, "Oh, congratulations, you're now Slovak," so it was anticlimactic to say the least. But anyway, I was very happy to do it. And then they give you this. They call this listina. I think it stands for birth certificate or that's birth certificate. It stands for citizenship certificate. And this, from my understanding, they only give it to you once. So they tell you to lock it up in a safe somewhere so you always have it. So this is your proof of Slovak citizenship. And then once you have the listina, you can apply for your passport. That's where I'm at right now. So I've got the listina. Don't have the passport yet. After you get that listina, then you have to submit your birth certificate. So my U.S. birth certificate, so my birth can be registered in Slovakia. I submitted my marriage certificate, so my marriage can be registered in Slovakia. Once those things are done, and they're taking their time on this. Trust me, it's been about 4 or 5 months. Then I can apply for passport. So I don't have the passport yet, but hopefully it's soon. And when I do apply for the passport, I'll have to go back to New York to do that. So that's at least 3 trips to New York, all the fees for the lawyer, the paperwork, the apostille fees, all in. I would say I'm probably, with the lawyers and all that, it's several $1,000s. But if you speak Slovak, if you know somebody that speaks Slovak, if you have a simpler case, maybe your grandparent was born there or your parent, I don't think you need a lawyer. I don't think it. I think really I think the benefit to me for the lawyers was the translations and the understanding of the process, and just being they spoke English, so they were kind of my go-betweens. But like I said, if you understand the language or know somebody that does, you may not need to go the lawyer route. But anyway, so someday soon, I hope to have that passport. It's I think it's a great opportunity for anybody that wants to connect to Slovakia. I think the SLA is a great the Slovak Living Abroad certificate. But the passport does allow you some things the Slovak living abroad certificate doesn't, which is EU citizenship. So as an EU member state, if you're a citizen of Slovakia, you could live and work in any EU country in the world, in Europe. And it's quite a good passport from what I understand. There's many countries that don't require you to get a visa if you want to travel there, whereas if you're just a U.S. citizen, they do. So there's a lot of benefits. If you have children, they could be eligible for Slovak citizenship. And my understanding is that the universities in the EU are very inexpensive. So if you have EU citizenship, or one of your children does, or your great grandchildren, you could go to an EU university for quite cheaply, and they're quite good universities as well. So tons of opportunities. I think it's great for young people that maybe want to work in Europe or live in Europe someday or go to school there. It's great for if you have a child or a grandchild, maybe you can get citizenship, but they're not eligible. But once you get it, then there may be a pathway for them to get it. So anyway, that's kind of the journey I went on. I included a couple pictures here. This is my great grandfather here in the tie with my great grandmother, and then my grandfather there in the middle. And then a little bit later, this is my grandfather who was born in Sagamore, and my grandmother who was born in Lorain, Ohio. And in between them is my dad. And then to the right is a picture of my dad when he was a little bit younger, playing baseball. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. But I'm